Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Rosemary, for your clarity and the very valuable information you provide every time you come to brief the Council. Thank you, Mr. Mazou and Director General Ghebreyesus, for your sobering information. Dear colleagues, 3 weeks into this unprovoked, unjustified, illegal and deadly aggression by Russia, and the terrible facts are hardly surprising since anticipated nearly to the detail. Massive casualties among civilians, mass graves, widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure, ruined homes, schools and hospitals, lives blown away by bombardments, children's dreams charred into smoke. There is no need to describe this devastating situation. Yet, as we just heard, and by the top UN representatives, not by the so-called West hysteria, is soul-wrenching and coincides with the shocking media reports on the horrors of the war and the misery unleashed upon Ukraine for no reason. I will maybe just recall the summarizing words of the Secretary General when he said 2 days ago, Ukraine is in fire and is being decimated. Guess by who? Over 3 million refugees in only 3 weeks, more than the entire population of my country. Some 2 million people displaced internally. 12 million people affected in the areas hardest hit by the war. UNICEF has evidence that since the start of the war, forced by this brutal aggression, every second a child has crossed the border of Ukraine. SRSG pattern warns that abuse, risks of sexual and gender-based violence as well as trafficking continue to mount amid wide-scale displacement. Several appeals for humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians went unheeded. Many people remain trapped in areas of conflict and with essential services disrupted are unable to meet their basic needs, including food, water and medicine. For the estimated hundreds of thousands who remain, there is simply nowhere to go. They can be killed even for queuing for bread, as it happened. This is the angry and the true face of the Russian aggression. Mr. President, the director of WHO that we just heard confirmed that there have been 33 attacks on Ukrainian healthcare facilities, infrastructure and workers since the beginning of the invasion, otherwise 2 every day. There are, unfortunately, nearly a dozen conflicts in the world today. Out of 89 attacks on health system around the world this year so far, 33 have been only in Ukraine. Therefore, attacking healthcare facilities and workers is becoming a tactic of war in Ukraine. Nothing is being spared. First, there was this maternity ward in Mariupol. Then there was a mosque. Yesterday, Russians bombed the drama theater in Mariupol, a shelter for nearly 1,000 citizens who were not able to flee the city. And as it was mentioned, the word children in large Russian script was painted on the ground outside the theater. Everything must be bombed. Despite this grueling picture, the main news is not just what I said. The main news is that Ukraine is holding on, that Ukraine is resisting, that Ukraine is winning and Russia is deep in the mud. On the ground, morally, legally, and internationally. And we know now that for Russia to win this war of choice, it has to Grozny the entire Ukraine. It has to Aleppo all its cities. It has to Mariupol everything there. And even after that, we will be told here again that it's not their fault. C'est la faute à Voltaire. Mr. President, Ukraine won yesterday the first legal victory of the International Court of Justice. ICJ, the guardian of international law, ruled that there was no evidence to support Russian claims that Ukraine was committing genocide in the Luhansk and Donetsk. The court called for immediate suspension of any kind of military operations by Russia and entities, organizations, or persons under its control. So the question is, will Russia respect the court's order, or will it unplug and cancel itself completely, entirely, from the international law? Mr. President, beyond the human toll, the infrastructure and residential deliberate destructions and large-scale humanitarian crisis, there is another major crisis, the economic impact of the aggression. UNDP has warned that every day of delayed peace will accelerate a free fall into poverty in Ukraine. UNDP again projected yesterday that 90% of the Ukrainian population could be facing poverty and extreme economic vulnerability should the war deepen. In the event of a continuing protracted war in Ukraine, almost 1/3 of the population will fall below the poverty line, and a further 62% will be at extreme risk of falling into poverty within the next 12 months. It warned, again, the UNDP, that 18 years of social economic achievement could be lost. And this would set the country, an entire region, back decades, leaving deep social and economic scars for generations to come. Who in this room or outside it believes then a single word from Russia about SDGs, about Agenda 2030, because these terrible effects will not only be felt in Ukraine, but in the entire world? Mr. President, Russia has proposed a text for a humanitarian resolution. We think it is wrong. It is worst. It's a mockery of proportions, a move worth of the Guinness record of hypocrisy. Russia cannot shoot first and then come disguised as a doctor. The only way to minimize humanitarian consequences for the Ukrainian population is simple. Russia has to stop the war, withdraw its troops, and go home. No one should get confused by a text just because it is called humanitarian, when the only aim is to provide cover for the war. So, colleagues, don't fall for the new clothes of the emperor. The Russian aggression is naked out there. Thank you.